3 months later, Sarah sat in the same lecture hall where her journey had begun, but everything had changed. The seats that once held nervous cadets from across the galaxy were now filled with military officers, tacticians, and xenobiologists who had come to study the Chen Protocol, the tactical doctrine that had emerged from her successful defense of the Academy. Commander Zexithara, now promoted to Admiral, stood at the front of the room where the holographic display showed not images of Veltar terror, but detailed breakdowns of their behavioral patterns and psychological vulnerabilities. The key insight, he was explaining to the assembled officers, was recognizing that apex predators operate according to evolutionary psychology, not military doctrine. Cadet Chen understood that fear is a weapon that cuts both ways. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat, no longer in the back row but in the front section reserved for distinguished observers. The attention still felt strange after a lifetime of blending into the background. The Academy had become the center of a revolution in military thinking. Species across the galaxy were studying Earth's predator-prey relationships, learning to read the behavioral patterns that humans took for granted. The Chen Protocol had been implemented by 17 different fleets, with similar success rates against Veltar incursions. The Veltar, Admiral Zexithara continued, have not attempted another major offensive since the Academy incident. Intelligence reports suggest they've withdrawn to reassess their strategies against what they now perceive as a galaxy full of potential territorial competitors. A Koranian general raised his armored hand. Admiral, what about long-term implications? Won't the Veltar eventually adapt to these new tactics? Undoubtedly, Zexithara replied, which is why our tactical development must remain dynamic. Predator-prey relationships are constantly evolving. Our understanding must evolve as well. After the briefing, Sarah made her way through corridors that had been rebuilt and expanded to accommodate the Academy's new status as a center for xenobiological military research. She passed laboratories where scientists from dozens of species worked to understand the behavioral patterns of various galactic threats. Her destination was a small office that had been assigned to her as the Academy's first behavioral warfare specialist, a position created specifically to continue developing the theories that had saved them all. Cadet Chen? Sarah turned to find a young human woman in a fresh Academy uniform, looking nervous and excited. Behind her stood two other humans, a man and a woman who appeared to be recent arrivals from Earth. I'm Lieutenant Chen now, Sarah said with a smile. What can I do for you? I'm Cadet Martinez, the young woman said. These are Cadets Thompson and Kim. We just arrived from Earth and we heard about what you did here. We wanted to thank you for showing the galaxy that humans have something valuable to contribute. Sarah studied their faces, eager, hopeful, ready to prove themselves in a universe that had once seemed impossibly vast and dangerous. She remembered that feeling well. You don't need to thank me, she said. You just need to remember that being human isn't something to overcome. It's an advantage to leverage. Every species in this galaxy evolved different strengths. Our strength is understanding behavior, reading patterns and adapting to threats that others see as impossible. Is it true that you figured out how to beat the Veltar by watching animal documentaries? Asked Cadet Thompson. Sarah laughed. Partly, but more importantly, I learned to trust what I understood about predator behavior instead of dismissing it as primitive thinking. Sometimes the simplest explanations are the right ones. Her communicator chimed with an incoming message marked with the highest priority encoding. Sarah activated the holographic display and found herself looking at Admiral Corvash's scarred features. Lieutenant Chen, we have a situation developing in the Outer Rim. A species calling themselves the Thorak have begun expanding aggressively, using tactics we've never encountered before. Their approach appears to be psychological, rather than military. They're somehow convincing entire civilizations to surrender without firing a shot. Sarah felt the familiar tingle of a puzzle demanding to be solved. What do we know about their social structure? That's just it, we don't know anything. They're completely unlike any species we've cataloged. Their behavior patterns don't match our databases. Admiral, I'd like to study the available data and provide a preliminary assessment. I was hoping you'd say that. The transport leaves in 6 hours. Pack for extended deployment. This could take months to unravel. As the transmission ended, Sarah turned back to the 3 new cadets who had been listening with growing excitement. Cadets, would you like your first real assignment? I could use research assistants who understand how to think outside conventional military doctrine. Their eager nods reminded Sarah of her own determination when she first arrived at the academy. But now, instead of sitting quietly in the back row hoping not to be noticed, she was leading the charge into unknown territory. The galaxy was vast and full of threats that demanded new ways of thinking. Humanity's journey among the stars had only just begun, but already they were proving that sometimes the most valuable perspective comes from those who see patterns others miss. As Sarah prepared for her new mission, she thought about the quiet human girl who had once sat in the back of this very lecture hall, absorbing lessons about apex predators, while her classmates focused on technology and tactics. That girl had learned something important, that understanding the psychology of conflict was just as crucial as understanding its weapons. The Thorak would soon discover what the Veltar had learned, that humans had spent millions of years learning to survive in a dangerous universe, and those lessons translated remarkably well to the challenges of galactic civilization. Sarah gathered her research materials and headed for the transport bay, ready to face whatever new impossibility the universe had to offer. Behind her, the Academy continued its work of training the galaxy's defenders, but now they were learning lessons that went far beyond conventional military doctrine. They were learning to think like predators when the situation demanded it, and like prey when survival required it. Most importantly, they were learning that sometimes the greatest weapons against the unknown were curiosity, adaptability, and the willingness to challenge assumptions that everyone else took for granted. The galaxy was a big place, full of species that had evolved in ways that defied imagination. But as Sarah boarded the transport that would carry her to her next challenge, she carried with her the confidence that came from knowing one simple truth. Humans had always been very good at figuring out how to survive in places where they didn't belong, and the universe was about to learn just how adaptable that made them. The next 36 hours blurred together in a frenzy of preparation that transformed the Academy from a place of learning into something resembling a predator's lair. Sarah found herself coordinating teams of engineers, technicians, and volunteers as they implemented modifications that would have seemed impossible under normal circumstances. Repositioning the gamma-section energy projectors, reported Chief Engineer Makthos, a six-armed Xerillian whose species excelled at rapid mechanical assembly. These new firing patterns will create overlapping kill zones rather than defensive barriers. Sarah studied the tactical display, watching as green indicators showed their progress. Good. Remember, when the Veltar probe these positions, they need to see aggressive territorial response, not defensive measures. The moment their scouts enter range, we hit them with everything in those zones. Cadet Chen, called out Dr. Valandra, the Academy's xenobiology instructor. The biosensor modifications are complete. We can now detect Veltar approach signatures at twice the previous range. Excellent. That gives us more time to prepare our response. Sarah made notes on her ever-present tablet, which had become her command center for the operation. The volunteer crew had grown to nearly 200 beings, cadets, instructors, and support staff who had chosen to stay despite the evacuation orders. Sarah often caught them looking at her with expressions she couldn't quite read. Some seemed awed that a human cadet was leading their defense preparations. Others appeared skeptical that such an unconventional plan could succeed. Commander Zexthera approached her workstation, his multiple eyes studying the tactical displays. Status report, Cadet. Sir, we've completed modifications to 87% of our defensive systems. The energy projectors are now configured for aggressive counterattack rather than barrier defense. Sensor networks have been calibrated to Veltar biosignatures, and we've established 3 primary response zones based on predicted probe patterns. And if your predictions are wrong, Sarah met his gaze steadily, then we'll adapt. That's what predators do. They adjust their strategies based on new information. The commander's mandibles clicked, and what Sarah had learned was approval. You've shown remarkable leadership under pressure, Cadet. Your instructors would be proud. They will be proud, sir, when we survive this. A chime from the communication system interrupted their conversation. The main display activated, showing Admiral Korvash's image from his flagship, now positioned in the outer system. Commander, what's your status? Our long-range sensors show the Veltar force is larger than initial estimates. We're reading at least 12 bioships in their advanced fleet. Sarah felt her stomach drop. 12 ships meant a significant pack, perhaps a full hunting group with specialized roles and coordinated tactics. Admiral, modifications are nearly complete, Commander Zexathera reported. We'll be ready for their arrival. Commander, I'm ordering you to abort this plan and complete evacuation procedures. 12 ships is too large a force for your skeleton crew to handle. Sarah stepped forward before she could stop herself. Admiral, with respect, that might actually work in our favor. Both the Admiral and Commander turned their attention to her. Sarah could feel the weight of everyone in the war room watching her again. Explain, Cadet, Admiral Korvash said tersely. A larger pack means more complex hierarchy and territorial instincts. They'll be more cautious about challenging what they perceive as an established predator's territory. The bigger the pack, the more they have to lose in a territorial dispute. Or, the Admiral replied grimly, the more confident they'll be about overwhelming any resistance. Not if we convince them early that this isn't ordinary resistance. Sarah pulled up her behavioral analysis again. Large packs probe more systematically but retreat more readily when faced with unexpected threats. They can't afford to lose pack members in a territorial dispute that might weaken them for future hunts. Commander Zexathera studied the data. She's right, Admiral. The larger pack structure actually supports her tactical theory. The Admiral was quiet for several moments. Very well. But I want constant updates. At the first sign that your plan isn't working, you evacuate immediately. Understood, sir. As the communication ended, Sarah realized that the real pressure was just beginning. In less than 8 hours, the most feared predators in the galaxy would arrive to test their defenses. All stations, final systems check, she announced to the war room. The response came back quickly. Every modification was complete. Every weapon system was charged, every sensor array was calibrated. Sarah found herself thinking about Earth, about the wilderness camping trips with her family, where she had learned to read animal behavior. Her parents had taught her that the key to surviving in predator territory wasn't to avoid danger. It was to understand it well enough to respond appropriately. Cadet Chen called out, Sensor Technician Korthik. I'm reading energy signatures consistent with Veltar bioships dropping out of hyperspace. Distance approximately 4 light hours in closing. Time to arrival? 7 hours, 33 minutes. Sarah activated the Academy's intercom system. All personnel, this is Tactical Command. The Veltar fleet has arrived in system. All teams report to battle stations. Remember, we are not prey today. We are the apex predator defending our territory. The war room transformed into a nerve center of controlled tension. Display screens showed the approaching bioships as dark organic shapes that seemed to absorb starlight. Unlike the geometric vessels of galactic civilization, the Veltar ships looked grown rather than built, living creatures adapted for the void of space. Analyzing their approach vector, reported navigation specialist Threndar, a Altarian whose nervous system was perfectly suited for tracking multiple moving objects. They're not coming straight in. The fleet is spreading into a standard probe formation. Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction. Perfect. They're following predicted behavior patterns. How long until they reach our outer sensor perimeter? 6 hours, 12 minutes to sensor contact. Estimated probe initiation in 7 hours, 15 minutes. All teams stand by for final briefing, Sarah announced. She looked around the war room at faces representing a dozen different species, all focused on her with a mixture of hope and terror. Listen carefully, she began. In approximately 7 hours, the Veltar will begin probing our defenses. They're expecting us to respond like every other civilization they've encountered. Defensive positioning, retreat when pressed, desperate calls for help. She activated the tactical display showing their modified defensive grid. Instead, we're going to respond like a territorial predator that views their approach as a challenge. When they probe Zone Alpha, we don't just repel them. We launch an immediate counterattack designed to inflict maximum damage. When they probe Zones Beta and Gamma, same response. What if they escalate to full assault? Asked Engineering Chief Makthos. Then we escalate faster, Sarah replied. Predators respect strength and decisive action. The moment they realize we're willing to fight aggressively for this territory, their pack instincts will make them reassess whether conquest is worth the cost. Commander Zexathera stepped forward. And if your assessment of their psychology is incorrect? Sarah met his gaze. Then we make them pay such a high price for this academy that they'll think twice before attacking the next target. Either way, we buy time for the evacuation fleets and show the galaxy that the Veltar can be challenged. As the hours ticked by, Sarah found herself moving through the Academy's corridors, checking on defensive positions and offering encouragement to the volunteer crews. The atmosphere had changed from panic to determined focus. Beings who had never seen combat were preparing to face the galaxy's most feared predators with a confidence that surprised even Sarah. 4 hours to contact, announced Korthek over the intercom. Sarah returned to the war room and settled into the tactical command station. Around her, the volunteer crew maintained their positions with the disciplined calm of seasoned warriors. She realized that her unconventional plan had given them something precious, a sense of agency rather than helplessness. Energy readings are increasing, reported Sensor Chief Velthros. The bioships are activating what appear to be scanning systems. They're studying us, Sarah murmured. Learning our energy signatures, mapping our defensive positions. She activated the intercom. All stations prepare for psychological warfare. They're going to try to trigger fear responses before they even enter weapons range. As if responding to her words, the main display suddenly filled with an image that made several cadets gasp. A massive Veltar face filled the screen. Black eyes like holes in space, mandibles that could crush steel, and an intelligence that seemed to peer directly into their souls. The creature spoke in a voice like grinding stone, its words translated by the Academy's systems. Weak prey things. Your fear feeds us. Your terror makes the hunt sweet. Surrender now and your deaths will be swift. Sarah stood and walked calmly to the main display, aware that every eye in the room was on her. When she spoke, her voice carried across the intercom to every corner of the Academy. Unknown vessel, you are trespassing in claimed territory. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences of territorial violation. The Veltar's image seemed to focus on her, black eyes narrowing. You dare challenge the Apex? Your species will be consumed, your world stripped bare. Sarah smiled, a predator's smile that showed teeth. Feel free to try. We'll be waiting. She cut the transmission and turned to face the war room. 2 hours to contact. All stations report readiness. The responses came back crisp and confident. Whatever doubts the crew had harbored about their human tactical commander seemed to have evaporated. Cadet Chen, Commander Zexathara said quietly. That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever witnessed. It was necessary, Sarah replied. They needed to see that we're not afraid. Fear is their primary weapon. Take that away and they're just another enemy to defeat. As the Veltar fleet continued its approach, Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her. The Academy was ready. Her plan was as solid as she could make it. Now came the moment when theory would meet reality, and they would discover whether a human's understanding of predator behavior was enough to save them all. Sarah's fingers flew across her tablet as she pulled up Academy schematics, defensive systems, and every piece of data about Veltar behavior she had compiled. The 45-minute deadline felt like a blade hanging over her head, but her mind was clearer than it had ever been. Okay, she said to her group of cadets, who had gathered around her workstation like survivors around a fire. First principle: pack hunters test their prey before attacking. They probe for weakness, escape routes, and defensive capabilities. Cadet Korthek, the Centauri, whose crystalline features reflected her nervousness, leaned forward. So we give them what they expect to see? No. Sarah shook her head as she overlaid Academy defensive positions on her display. We give them what they don't expect. Pack hunters rely on predictable prey responses: running, hiding, defensive clustering. What if instead of acting like prey, we acted like a larger predator protecting its territory? Thormax's blue skin had taken on a healthier hue as he began to understand. You want to make the Academy appear dangerous instead of vulnerable. Exactly. Look at these defensive systems. Sarah highlighted various points on the Academy's layout. Energy barriers, automated weapon platforms, sensor networks. They were designed to repel conventional military assaults, but what if we reconfigured them to mimic the behavioral patterns of a territorial predator? She pulled up her research on Veltar pack dynamics. Every pack has an alpha. The alpha doesn't just lead through strength. It controls territory, resources, and pack behavior through strategic positioning and displays of dominance. The group exchanged uncertain glances. A Delmorian cadet named Velthros spoke up, his tentacles writhing skeptically. You're suggesting we try to intimidate creatures that have conquered 47 star systems? I'm suggesting we speak their language. Sarah brought up recordings from the containment battles. Watch these attack patterns. The Veltar always test defenses at 3 points before committing to an assault. Here, here, and here. She marked positions on the tactical display. They're looking for specific responses. What kind of responses? Asked Korthak. Sarah's childhood memories surfaced, watching wolves hunt elk in the North American wilderness, observing how pack predators communicated through body language and positioning. They're testing for fear responses, escape attempts, and defensive clustering. If we respond differently, Cadet Chen. Commander Zexthera's voice cut through her explanation. Present your proposal. Sarah stood, acutely aware that every senior officer in the war room was now watching her. The main display showed Veltar bioships continuing their approach, their estimated arrival time having dropped to 45 hours. Commander, I recommend we delay the evacuation and reconfigure our defensive systems to mimic territorial predator behavior instead of conventional military defense. Admiral Korvash's image flickered back onto the main screen. Commander Zexithara, what is the meaning of this delay? Sir, Cadet Chen has developed an unconventional tactical proposal that merits consideration. A cadet? The Admiral's scarred features twisted into a scowl. Commander, we are facing an extinction-level threat. This is not the time for training exercises. Sarah stepped forward before she could lose her nerve. Admiral, with respect, conventional tactics haven't stopped the Veltar. They broke through containment using the same strategies that defeated 47 civilizations. Maybe it's time to try something they haven't seen before. The Admiral's image focused on her with laser intensity. You have 2 minutes, Cadet. Explain your proposal. Sarah activated her tactical display, showing the Academy's layout with her proposed modifications. The Veltar are pack hunters. They follow predictable patterns when engaging prey, probe, test, then attack weak points. But their behavior changes dramatically when confronting another predator. She highlighted 3 key positions around the Academy's perimeter. Instead of positioning our defenses to repel attack, we position them to demonstrate territorial control. When the Veltar probe these positions, our response mimics alpha predator behavior. Aggressive counterattack rather than defensive clustering. Counterattack? Commander Zexithera's mandibles clicked rapidly. With what? Our defensive systems weren't designed for offensive operations. We don't need to actually defeat them in the probes, Sarah explained. We need to convince them that this territory belongs to something they don't want to challenge. Look at these recordings from their failed attacks on the Draknari homeworld. She pulled up footage that made several cadets gasp. The recordings showed a Veltar pack retreating from a planet after encountering the Draknari's massive predatory wildlife. The Draknari weren't technologically superior, Sarah continued, but their world was full of apex predators that the Veltar recognized as territorial competitors. The pack withdrew rather than risk a costly territorial dispute. Admiral Korvash leaned forward in his transmission. You're proposing we convince them the Academy is occupied by a rival predator species? I'm proposing we become the rival predator species. Sarah brought up her final tactical overlay. We modify our defensive systems to create aggressive response patterns. When they probe, we don't just defend, we launch immediate counterattacks designed to inflict maximum damage on their scout units. We make them believe this territory belongs to something dangerous enough to respect. The war room fell silent, except for the hum of computers and the distant sound of evacuation preparations in the corridors beyond. Sarah could feel her heart pounding as she waited for a response. The plan has merit, Commander Zexithera said finally, but it requires precise timing and coordination. If we miscalculate, we'll provoke a full assault on an unprepared position. Sir, Sarah said quietly, if we evacuate according to schedule, they'll catch our last transport ships in open space. Either way, we're gambling with lives. Admiral Korvash was quiet for a long moment, his scarred features unreadable. Finally, he spoke. Commander Zexithara, you have authorization to implement this plan with a volunteer skeleton crew. All non-essential personnel will continue evacuation procedures. I volunteer to stay, Sarah said immediately. As do I, added Thormax, followed quickly by Korthak and several other cadets from the analysis. Group Commander Zexithara surveyed the volunteers, young beings from across the galaxy, who had just committed to face humanity's most feared enemy based on theories developed by analyzing animal behavior. Very well, he said. Cadet Chen, you now have operational command of tactical implementation. We have 43 hours to turn this academy into the most dangerous territory the Veltar have ever encountered. As the room erupted into activity, Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her. For the first time since arriving at the academy, her human perspective wasn't a liability to overcome, it was an advantage that might save them all. But deep down, she knew that the real test wouldn't be in the preparation. It would come when the Veltar arrived and discovered that their prey had learned to bite back. The emergency alert that woke the academy at 347 hours confirmed Sarah's worst fears. Red lights bathed the corridors as cadets stumbled from their quarters, confusion and panic spreading like wildfire through the student body. All cadets report to designated emergency stations. The automated announcement echoed through the halls. This is not a drill. Repeat. This is not a drill. Sarah was already dressed and moving when her roommate, a nervous Altarian named Veska, finally managed to activate her translator implant. What's happening? Veska's tentacles writhed with anxiety as she struggled into her uniform. Containment breach, Sarah replied grimly, grabbing her data tablet and the research notes she had compiled. The Omega Sector. The words hit Veska like a physical blow. Her species had been among the first to encounter the Veltar, and the racial memory of that terror ran deep. That's impossible. The barriers are impregnable. Sarah helped her roommate to her feet as another announcement boomed through the dormitory. Senior class cadets report to War Room Alpha. All other students proceed to emergency shelters. As a senior cadet, Sarah made her way through corridors filled with frightened beings from across the galaxy. The academy, which usually hummed with confident energy, now felt like a hive under attack. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows, making even familiar faces appear alien and threatening. War Room Alpha was chaos. The massive holographic display at the room's center showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, with pulsing red indicators marking the Veltar breach points. Commander Zexathara stood at the center, coordinating with military officials whose faces appeared on communication screens surrounding the room. Status report, demanded Admiral Korvash, a Koranian whose scarred carapace told stories of battles across the galaxy. His image dominated the largest screen. 3 containment stations have gone dark, reported a Centauri technician, her crystalline fingers dancing across control interfaces. We're reading massive energy signatures consistent with Veltar bioships approaching the inner barriers. Sarah found herself assigned to a tactical analysis group with 15 other senior cadets from various species. Their task was to review available intelligence and provide recommendations for academy evacuation procedures. While others focused on evacuation routes and defense protocols, Sarah accessed the files she had been studying. "Chen," called out Cadet Thormax, a Fraxian whose blue skin had turned pale with stress. "You've been researching these creatures. What can you tell us about their attack patterns?" Sarah looked around the group, species that had evolved on worlds where predators were rare or extinct, where warfare was conducted with honor codes and diplomatic protocols. How could she explain what she was beginning to understand? "They won't attack randomly," she said carefully. "Veltar are pack hunters. They'll probe for weaknesses, test our responses, try to understand our capabilities before committing to a full assault." "Pack hunters?" The question came from a Dalmorian cadet whose tentacles had gone rigid with fear. The briefing said they were solitary apex predators. The briefings were wrong. Sarah pulled up her research on her tablet, projecting it to the group's shared display. "Look at the containment battle records. The Veltar never attacked until they had observed our defensive patterns for weeks. They're not just intelligent, they're strategic." A Centauri cadet named Korthek leaned forward. "If they're pack hunters, what does that mean for us?" Sarah's mind raced through everything she knew about Earth's pack predators. Wolves, hyenas, orcas. It means they have a hierarchy. Alpha leaders, specialized roles within the pack, coordinated hunting strategies. So? Thormax's impatience was showing. So traditional military doctrine assumes an enemy that thinks like us. Individual units following orders from central command. But pack hunters operate on shared intelligence and instinctive cooperation. The group fell silent as the implications sank in. Around them, the war room continued its frantic activity. But Sarah noticed that Commander Zexathara had moved closer to their analysis station. "Continue, Cadet Chen," the commander said quietly. Sarah glanced around the room, noting how many species were represented, how different their evolutionary backgrounds were. Every species here evolved their military thinking based on their own social structures. Hive minds fight differently than individualists. Honor-based cultures have different tactics than pragmatic ones. Your point? Zexthara's mandibles clicked impatiently. My point is that we're trying to fight an Earth-style pack predator using space-age military doctrine. It's like... She paused, searching for an analogy they would understand. It's like trying to negotiate with a hurricane. The war room's main display suddenly flashed with new data. A technician's voice cut through the background noise. Veltar bioships have breached the secondary containment line. Estimated time to reach Academy defense perimeter: 47 hours. Admiral Korvash's image reappeared on the main screen. All Academy personnel are ordered to evacuate to the core worlds immediately. Transport ships are being dispatched. Admiral, Commander Zexathara stepped forward. Request permission to remain with a skeleton crew. The Academy's research facilities contain valuable intelligence that could aid in our understanding of the enemy. Denied, Commander. Your lives are more valuable than data. Full evacuation, no exceptions. As the transmission ended, Sarah felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. The Academy's evacuation would take at least 50 hours to complete, even with emergency protocols. If the Veltar arrived in 47 hours, the last transport ships would be caught completely vulnerable. Commander, she said, surprising herself with her boldness. I think we're making a mistake. The room seemed to pause. Zexathara turned his multiple eyes toward her, and Sarah could feel the attention of every being in the room. Explain, Cadet. Sarah took a deep breath. We're acting like prey, running, panicking, making ourselves vulnerable during evacuation. That's exactly what pack predators want: scattered, confused targets. The alternative being? The commander's voice was dangerously quiet. We make ourselves appear to be predators instead of prey. We turn the Academy into a trap. The silence that followed was broken by nervous laughter from several cadets. A Koranian officer nearby muttered something about primitive human thinking. But Commander Zexathara wasn't laughing. His mandibles had stopped clicking and his secondary arms had gone perfectly still. Signs that Sarah had learned indicated deep thought in his species. You have 45 minutes to present a detailed tactical proposal, he said finally. If it has merit, I'll consider delaying the evacuation long enough to implement it. As the commander moved away, Sarah realized that she had just volunteered to stake her career, and possibly her life, on a theory based on watching nature documentaries as a child on Earth. The other cadets in her group stared at her with mixtures of admiration and horror. Thormax leaned close and whispered, "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Sarah was already pulling up Academy schematics and defensive capabilities on her tablet. "I volunteered to save all our lives," she replied. "Now help me figure out how to turn a military academy into a pack hunter's nightmare." Sarah spent the next 3 days in the Academy's archives, diving deeper into Veltar research than any cadet had attempted before. While her classmates focused on conventional military tactics and advanced weaponry, she approached the problem from an entirely different angle. The archive's AI assistant, a pleasant blue hologram named Erix, materialized beside her study terminal. "Cadet Chen, you've accessed more Veltar files than the previous 5 graduating classes combined. Perhaps I could help direct your research?" "I'm looking for behavioral patterns," Sarah replied, not looking up from her tablet where she was cross-referencing attack videos, hunting strategies, territorial markers, social structures. Most military analysts focus on physical capabilities and technological countermeasures, Erix observed. "Are you approaching this from a xenobiology perspective?" Sarah paused her reading and looked at the AI. "Tell me, in all the recorded encounters with Veltar, what percentage resulted in immediate attack versus prolonged stalking behavior?" Erix's form flickered as he processed the request. "Analyzing combat records. Interesting. 67% of encounters involved stalking periods ranging from several minutes to multiple hours before the Veltar engaged. And during that stalking period, what were the victims doing? Running, hiding, attempting to call for help, or remaining motionless due to fear paralysis? Sarah nodded, making notes. What happened to victims who fought back immediately? Another pause. Calculating. Only 12 recorded instances of immediate counterattack. Result: 100% fatality rate, but with significantly shorter encounter duration. Show me the footage of those 12 incidents. The holographic display filled with security recordings from various encounters. Sarah watched carefully as desperate beings from different species launched futile attacks against Veltar. The creature's responses were swift and brutal, but something caught her attention. Arcs in each case where someone fought back immediately, the Veltar killed them quickly rather than prolonging the encounter. Why would an apex predator that feeds on fear hormones cut short its feeding time? I do not have sufficient data to answer that question, Cadet Chen. Sarah leaned back in her chair, pieces of a puzzle beginning to form in her mind. Every predator, she knew from Earth, had specific behavioral patterns that made sense from an evolutionary perspective. The Veltar were no different. They were just following rules that the galaxy's military minds hadn't recognized. Her tablet chimed with an incoming message from her study group. The other human cadets at the academy, all 3 of them, had formed an informal support network to help each other navigate the challenges of being the newest species in galactic civilization. Working late again? The message was from Marcus Rodriguez, a tactical studies major from Luna Colony. David and I are grabbing dinner at the commissary. You should join us. Sarah glanced at the time display and realized she had been in the archives for over 8 hours. Her stomach confirmed this with an audible growl. 20 minutes later, she sat with Marcus and David Park, the only other humans in their year, at a table in the far corner of the commissary. The food wasn't bad. The Academy's nutritional systems could synthesize meals suitable for any known species, but Sarah found herself missing the unpredictability of Earth cuisine. So what's got you buried in the archives? David asked, cutting into something that resembled chicken but tasted like fish. Let me guess, overachieving on the Veltar assignment? Just trying to understand them better, Sarah replied carefully. She had learned that even among her fellow humans, her analytical approach to problems sometimes made others uncomfortable. Marcus lowered his voice. Honestly, I don't get why they even teach us about them. The Veltar are contained, right? It's like studying extinct Earth dinosaurs. Extinction events have a way of reversing themselves, Sarah murmured, remembering her paleontology classes. Besides, understanding predator behavior helps you understand prey behavior too. David raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Think about it. Every species in the galaxy developed their military doctrines based on fighting other civilized species. Organized tactics, technological advantages, diplomatic solutions. But the Veltar aren't civilized in that sense. They're pure predator. So? Marcus asked. So what happens when civilized species encounter something that operates on completely different rules? They try to apply familiar solutions to unfamiliar problems. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion from across the commissary. Commander Zexithara had entered with several other instructors, including the Academy's commandant, a massive Coranian whose mere presence made the room quieter. Sarah watched as the group of instructors took a table near the center of the room. Their body language suggested this was more than a casual dinner. There was tension in their movements, quick glances around the room. Emergency faculty meeting? David wondered aloud. During dinner hours? Marcus shook his head. That's not normal. Sarah's enhanced hearing, another advantage of growing up on a high-gravity world with dangerous wildlife, caught fragments of their conversation. Words like containment breach and Omega Sector made her blood run cold. She stood abruptly, causing both her friends to look at her with concern. Sarah, you okay? David asked. I need to get back to my research, she said, already gathering her things. Something tells me this assignment just became a lot more important. As she left the commissary, Sarah could feel eyes following her. She had grown accustomed to the curious stares from other species, but this felt different. Commander Zexithara was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Back in her dormitory room, Sarah pulled up her personal communication terminal and sent a coded message to her brother Jake, who worked for Earth's intelligence services. If the Veltar containment was failing, humanity needed to know. She returned to her research with renewed urgency, but now she wasn't just analyzing the Veltar for an academic assignment. She was trying to understand them because the galaxy might soon depend on it. As the Academy's night cycle began and the corridors grew quiet, Sarah made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in a classified addendum to a military report, she found a single line that had been overlooked by every analyst who came before her. During the final battle for Veltar containment, one human observer had been present, a Earth diplomatic attaché named Elizabeth Santos. Her personal notes, buried deep in the archives, contained a single observation that made Sarah's heart race. The creature's behavior reminds me of pack hunters from Earth. They're not just killing machines. They're following a social structure we don't understand. Sarah stared at the screen, her mind racing. If the Veltar were pack hunters, then everything the galaxy thought it knew about them was wrong. And if everything was wrong, then maybe, just maybe, there was a way to beat them that no one had ever considered. The Galactic Defense Academy's lecture hall buzzed with nervous energy as cadets from 17 different species filled the tiered seats. At the front, Commander Zexithara, a towering Krillian with chitinous armor plates covering his 8-foot frame, adjusted his holographic display with 4 precise movements of his secondary arms. Today we discuss combat theory against the most dangerous predator species in known space. His voice resonated through translator implants, causing several smaller species to shudder. The Veltar. In the back row, Sarah Chen adjusted her position slightly, her worn academy jacket barely fitting her small frame. She had learned long ago that sitting in the back meant fewer stares, fewer whispered comments about the primitive human, who somehow earned a spot at the most prestigious military academy in the galaxy. The hologram flickered to life, showing a creature that made half the class recoil. The Veltar stood 12 feet tall, covered in obsidian scales that seemed to absorb light. Its 6 arms ended in claws capable of rending titanium, and its jaw could snap a shuttle in half. But what made them truly terrifying were their eyes. Completely black, like staring into the void of space itself. The Veltar conquered 47 star systems before the Galactic Council managed to contain them in the Omega sector. Commander Zexithara continued, his own intimidating presence somehow diminished by the hologram. They are the apex predator. No species has ever successfully engaged them in single combat and survived. A Zentari cadet, her crystalline skin reflecting the room's blue lighting, raised her hand. What about the Korthak, their natural warriors? Extinct, wiped out when they tried to reclaim their homeworld from Veltar occupation. The commander's mandibles clicked, a sign of discomfort in his species. The average Veltar possesses strength equivalent to 23 standard humanoids, speed that surpasses most atmospheric fighters, and regenerative capabilities that can heal mortal wounds in minutes. Sarah found herself leaning forward slightly, studying the creature's movement patterns in the hologram. Something about the way it moved seemed familiar, though she couldn't place why. Their hunting strategy is simple but effective, the commander continued. They isolate their prey, use their superior physical capabilities to induce terror, then strike when their victim is paralyzed by fear. They feed on adrenaline and fear hormones as much as flesh. A Dalmorian cadet, his tentacles writhing anxiously, spoke up. Surely our technology gives us an advantage. Plasma weapons, energy shields. Commander Zexithara's expression grew grim. Veltar scales deflect most energy weapons. They move too fast for targeting systems to lock on effectively, and they're intelligent. They learn and adapt to new threats within hours. The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of the environmental systems. Sarah noticed how even the typically boastful Koranian cadets had stopped their usual posturing. This is why understanding your enemy is crucial, the commander said, beginning to pace in front of the hologram. Fear is their greatest weapon. They have evolved specifically to trigger terror responses in other species. The moment you see a Veltar, your instincts scream at you to run, to hide, To surrender. Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to a small scar on her forearm, hidden beneath her sleeve. She remembered a camping trip back on Earth when she was 12, face to face with a grizzly bear that had wandered into their campsite. While her family panicked, she had done something that confused everyone later. She had stood her ground, made herself appear larger, and slowly backed away while maintaining eye contact. The bear had eventually lost interest and wandered off. The Veltar have been contained for now, the commander was saying, but intelligence suggests they're developing new technologies. If they ever break free from the Omega sector, the galaxy will face an extinction-level threat. A Fraxian cadet, his blue skin pale with fear, asked, "What hope do we have against such creatures?" Commander Zexathara paused his pacing. "That, cadet, is what you're here to learn. Tactics, strategy, the proper use of resources and technology. But most importantly, you're here to learn to overcome your instinctual responses. Fear is natural, but it cannot rule you." Sarah almost smiled at that. Growing up on Earth, where every environment contained some form of predator, had taught humans to manage fear differently than most species. While others had evolved in relatively safe environments, humans had learned to think clearly in the presence of danger. "For your assignment," the commander announced, "you will each prepare a tactical analysis of how to engage a Veltar in combat. Consider their strengths, identify potential weaknesses, and propose strategies that might prove effective. Due next week." The hologram winked out, and cadets began filing toward the exits, chattering nervously among themselves. Sarah remained, seated, staring at the spot where the Veltar had been displayed. Something about its movement pattern nagged at her, the way it had shifted its weight, the positioning of its arms. Human. Sarah looked up to find Commander Zexathara standing beside her row, his multiple eyes studying her with interest. "You seemed particularly focused during today's lecture. Do you have questions about the material?" Sarah stood, gathering her tablet. "No, sir, just thinking about the assignment." "Interesting." His mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "Most species find discussions of the Veltar unsettling. You appeared more analytical than frightened." "Fear doesn't help solve problems, sir." The commander's eyes widened slightly. Surprise in his species. "Indeed. I look forward to reading your tactical analysis, Cadet Chen." As Sarah made her way toward the exit, she could feel the commander's gaze following her. She had learned to keep her thoughts to herself at the academy, where her human perspective often clashed with conventional wisdom. But as she walked through the corridors filled with cadets from across the galaxy, her mind was already working on the assignment. The other cadets saw an unstoppable monster. Sarah was beginning to see something else entirely. Patterns that reminded her of creatures from Earth. Behaviors that might be predictable rather than chaotic. Perhaps being from a world of predators would finally prove useful in ways the Academy had never anticipated. She just had to be careful not to reveal too much too soon.